I'm going to go over how to do the simple port scanner from Chapter 2. And the main purpose of this application is, yes, to check the ports and to get comfortable with writing some scripting. However, it's mostly to understand what happens under the hood when we run our port scanners that are automated, because sometimes we want to refine our tools so that they can be more focused and efficient. So, having said that, we're going to go ahead and get started. So, for me, for the most part, what I usually will do is I will go ahead and create a new file here. So let's see here. I'm going to create a new document, and we're just going to do an empty file. And so this one here, we're going to do a temp port scanner, and you can see that I'm using camel case notation for our naming convention, naming nomenclature. Okay, and so we've created that, and I'm going to go ahead and open it with the idle, because we're going to want to keep this as a script. And so the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to import the arg parse and the socket. We're going to need socket in order to check our ports, to test the ports. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and set up the template like I always do, and then we'll start coding. All right, so this is the template that I almost always use, and it's just defining our function. It's going, of course, it's going to be main. The return down here isn't necessary, but I kind of always put it there out of habit. And then, of course, our usual call our main if it matches the name. Okay, so now another thing I'm going to do here is I already know that I'm going to create a separate function that's actually going to check the ports. I don't want to do it from the main. You could simplify this and completely do everything from the main, but I just think it's just cleaner to do it in this manner. So I'm going to combine port scan, and I'm going to take in a couple of parameters or arguments, and they're going to be called T and P. I'm going to use that to indicate that that we're going to be taking in a target host that we're targeting and a port that we're also targeting. All right, and this time I am going to return something. So I'm going to return what I'm going to call port status, because I want to know what the status is. I'm going to go ahead and return. And so up here I do need to define this variable. So let's go ahead and do that. All right. Okay, so I have the main template, and I'm ready to start doing some coding. Now, the first thing that I'm going to do is I am going to use the arg parser, and I like using the arg parser because the opt parser, the opt is depreciated, and so for this to run on Python 3, we need to use the arg parse. All right, so having said that, we're going to go ahead and set up our arg parser. So I'll go ahead and write that. Parser has been created. And so we're going to declare this variable called parser, and it's going to be assigned the value of the arg parse, and the property of that arg parse is going to be argument parser. And here we're just saying we're doing a description. What is the description? And the description is going to be, we're going to be using this T for target host and P for the port, and this is going to be the nature of our entry that the user needs to enter. Okay, so now what we're going to do is I'm going to add an argument. So the way you do that with the arg parser is just simply add, and it's argument. All right, and I'm going to go ahead and type that in. We're going to have the two arguments, one for the host and one for the port. I'm going to go ahead and type those up. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and turn my number lines on just because it's easier to talk with to reference the code with the number lines. All right, on lines 7 and 8, we added the two arguments, and so here you'll see the -t, and this is what's going to be displayed to the user, or the user needs to enter that the -t, and then the destination for this argument is going to be target host. This one's going to be target port. The type or string, I could do int here, but I'm going to go ahead and do that later. So right now I'm just taking it as a string. And then if the user needs to know what this does, they can always look at the help, and it's going to be specify target host, specify the target ports, separated by a comma, so they can do multiple ports with this. All right, so the next thing we're going to do here is we need to set up our args. So we're going to say args equal parser.parse. Can you guess it? Args. Okay. And so that gets us to the args. Now I need to set up two variables, target host and target port, and set them to the actual destination right up in here. Okay, so now on lines 12 and 13 we have our target host and target ports, and they're equal to or being assigned to the value of args target host. So right here, args target host and args target port, args target port. So how the user enters this is how it's going to be. It's going to be assigned to the target host and target ports. Okay, you'll notice that here I went ahead and did a dot split by comma, and that's because on line 8, when the user enters, let's say 80, comma 10, 20, or 100 or whatever series of ports, they can enter that comma, and now it'll be entered in as a list or an array, and we can keep track of that. Okay. So the next thing we're going to do is we need to test and make sure that the user actually entered something into our target host and target port. Okay, so I added lines 15 through 18, and your code should be self-documenting, but every once in a while you might want to throw a comment in to let the user know what's happening. I didn't do that up here because as soon as the user sees the parser, another coder is going to know that this is what I'm getting the user information here because of the parser, and we're parsing it. Okay, but here, once we start setting the conditions, it might not be clear right away. So without a doubt, they can look and say, okay, we're going to test user input and then call the PortScan function. And line 15 just says it all. This is what's going to happen inside of this little block of code. All right, so if the target host is empty or the target port, so this is an OR statement here, or the target ports has no value, then we're going to go ahead and say print, you must specify a target host and ports, and that'll be that. All right, so, but if we have information in both of these, if they both have values, then we're going to go ahead and now we're going to actually do we're going to do a loop here because we're going to want to loop through each of the different ports that's listed in the host. So what we would do here is we would just simply, I'm going to use a for loop, which is the one that's appropriate to use. And we're going to say for p in target ports, and what we're going to do here is I'm just going to go ahead and print it out right here. Print, this is where we're going to call the port scan. So port scan, the function we haven't written yet. And we need to pass it our information, so the correct arguments need to be passed. Okay, so they have information. The user's entered a host, and they've entered at least one port, and so it jumps to the else statement on 18, and now we enter a for loop because we need to iterate through each of the ports that were entered in the target ports, and each of those ports, which are going to be separated by commas, we're going to iterate through those, and we're going to call those p. So now we're going to call the port scanner down here, and we're going to say, okay, print port scan target host comma p. So these are the two arguments that are being passed, and we're calling the port scan, and then we're printing out whatever this function returns. So this function is going to return some type of message. We haven't written this yet. And that's going to be called port status. It's going to return that. And so that port status is going to be printed out right here on line 20. And that's so that we can print out information on each port that is scanned. All right. That is pretty much it. So the main is completed. There's really not much to it. Set up our user parser, check to see if they entered information. If they did, then iterate through each port that they entered. That's really it. Okay, so now let's take a look at the port scan, and this is really the part that does all the important things that we need to do. So the first thing we need to do is we need to set our socket. So I'm just going to call sock This is how most programmers will do it. They just say sock. And now we're going to use we're going to call the socket, and we're going to call a property socket. And this time we are going to use, well, let me write this real quick and then I'll explain it. Okay, so this right is socket.af underscore inet. This is how we're going to try and communicate with, or create the connection to the host IP address. Now, the inet is the property that we use when we're looking at the IP Internet Protocol 4, or the 4 octets. If it was, there's a different one if we're going to be looking at the IPv6, but for right now, this is for 4. All right, so now that we've done that, we're looking at our IP, and we're creating our communication in our socket so that we can try to connect to those ports. Now the next thing we're going to do is we need to set up an if statement, because we need to know what to do with our connection, if it works or doesn't work. So I'm going to use an if else statement, and I'm going to use the sock.connect_ex property, and then I'll explain it. Alright, so we have this created now, the port scan, and it's really simple. There's not a lot going on here. We're going to check the connection, and again we're using the property connect_x, and we're passing it the IP address of the host and the port. And here's where I'm going to go ahead and cast it to an int, because right now it's a string, because it was pulled in as a string up here on line 8. So now here on line 28, we're going to go ahead and cast it to a p, or excuse me, to an int, and now we're ready to try and make that connection to the IP address and to the port. That's what's happening here. Now, if it cannot make that connection here, then that port is closed. Else, the port is open. And so that's just what this is doing. Just a nice little if-else statement. And then we're assigning the string. So I'm going to go ahead and take port, which you remember port has been cast as an int. So now I need to cast it back as a string, because I want to concatenate it to this little message that says closed. And then over here, concatenate the port, cast it to a string, and then concatenate it to this little message here that says open. And that's just the little message that we're going to send back to the main. And then of course we'll return that message back to the main, back up in here on line 20, and then it gets printed. And that's it. So we can iterate through a number of ports, so whatever the user wants to enter, to check the ports, to see what ports are open. Now, again, this is just a simple, very, very simple port scanner that's meant for you to understand what's happening underneath the hood. We'll take a look at the nmap later. Right now, this is just the simple port scanner. Okay, so having said that, let's put this aside now, and let's go ahead and open up our console. And let's save this, because I always got to make sure this is saved. And I just saved this to the desktop, so it would be easier. Normally we'd have it in our own directory. So let's change directory to desktop, and we're going to do that. And now we're here. Now I can go ahead and run the command for this. And so I'm going to go ahead and just call it sudo, and I have some that are already set up, so I'm going to go ahead and use these. So here I'm going to use Python 3, and I'm going to call the port scan. Actually, this one's not port scan, this is the first one I did. So let me fix this real quick. This one is called temp port scanner, of course. And let's stay with our camera notation. All right, so now we have temp port scanner.py. We have our little T pops up that we need to enter that I was telling you about. That comes from right here on line 7. It's going to give us the destination. And so here I went ahead and typed in the IP address. Now this is the IP address for the host Windows machine. That's all we're doing is just something simple. And I'm going to throw a couple of ports in here. One that I know is open and one that I know is closed. So I'm going to, this is port 80 and this is port 1066. So let's go ahead and run that. And clearly right off the bat, come up with an error. So let me fix this because I have a typo here somewhere. and it's right here. That second little O. You can always count on me doing those kinds of things. So simple fix though. All right. So I call this command again, and it comes up right away, and it returns that port 80 is open and 1066 is closed. So I did this on purpose because these are two that I knew one was open and one was closed, so that way I knew for sure if it was working or not. Okay, so that's really it. It's a very, very simple little, example of how to do this. And if there's any questions, let me know, and I'll be happy to answer those. Now, I will do an example. Well, one other thing I want to show you is if we wanted to do this using Nmap on the system right here, I could just type in Nmap, type in the same IP address that I use. I'm doing the host, and it'll come up with every single open port right here, and just done. Now, it does show me that there's 989 closed ports. So this is really cool. This is a nice little way that you can do it. This is how you would do it if you were doing it very fast. And but if you wanted a targeted port scanner, you would want to use this. Now, I do have a different set of code that I use when I want to do some very targeted port scanning, and also using Nmap. Now this is using Nmap. This over here, we're not using Nmap to do this. So I hope that was interesting and a little bit of a learning experience. We will be getting to more complex and interesting code in a bit. But for right now, this should be a good starter. All right. Thank you. Happy coding.